I always believed our marriage was unshakable. Sophie and I had been together for over a decade, raising two wonderful kids and navigating life's ups and downs. We weren't perfect, but who is? Yet, nothing could have prepared me for the night my trust in her began to crumble. It was a mundane evening. She was on her phone while I loaded the dishwasher. The glow of her screen reflected in her glasses, and for a brief second, I noticed a name pop up in a notification. Chase. I didn't know a Chase, at least not in her circle of friends or colleagues. When she noticed me glancing her way, she quickly turned the phone face down and smiled nervously. "Just a work email," she said casually, though her voice was strained. Something about her tone unsettled me, but I shrugged it off. It wasn't like me to jump to conclusions. Yet, as the days passed, the name lingered in my mind, like a splinter I couldn't dislodge. At first, I tried to dismiss it. After all, Sophie was always glued to her phone, work demanded it, or so she often said. But then there were the late nights. Sophie had recently started staying late at her job at Apex Consulting, often claiming she was working on tight deadlines or attending last-minute meetings. It wasn't unusual for her to come home after the kids were in bed, her face flushed and her excuses rehearsed. "The team is under so much pressure," she would sigh, slipping off her heels. But the heels became stilettos, and the modest blouses she used to wear were replaced by fitted dresses and bold lipstick. It was a transformation that didn't go unnoticed, especially when she began working out obsessively. "You look amazing," I told her one evening as she returned from the gym. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Just trying to take better care of myself," she replied, brushing past me to grab her water bottle. That night, she left her phone charging on the kitchen counter while she showered. My heart raced as I stared at it, a battle waging in my mind. Was I really about to invade her privacy? A pang of guilt stopped me, and I turned away. But just as I started to walk out, a message lit up the screen. Asterisk, can't wait for this weekend. Counting the hours. Asterisk, the sender's name? Chase. My stomach dropped. My hands trembled as I stepped back. Who was this man? And what weekend was he talking about? I didn't have answers, but I knew one thing. I couldn't ignore this any longer. The following days were a blur of suspicion and self-doubt. I started noticing patterns. Her phone, once something we shared freely, was now glued to her hand or tucked away in her bag. When I casually asked to use it to snap a photo of the kids, she froze, her smile faltering. "Use yours," she said quickly, before making an excuse about needing to reply to a work message. The intimacy we once shared began to feel like a distant memory. The kisses were brief, perfunctory, and the warmth in her touch had vanished. Nights that used to be filled with laughter and whispered conversations were now silent. It wasn't long before I hit my breaking point. One evening, while she was showering, I logged into our shared phone account. My pulse thundered in my ears as I scrolled through the call logs. There it was, Chase's number, repeated over and over with timestamps that made my blood run cold. Midnight calls, text messages during her work meetings, and long exchanges on weekends when she claimed to be out with the girls. I confronted her that night. Well, I tried. "Sophie," I began, my voice trembling. "Who's Chase?" Her reaction was immediate, too immediate. "He's just a colleague," she said, her tone overly casual. But the flicker of panic in her eyes betrayed her. "We're working on a big project together." "Then why are you texting him at midnight?" I asked, unable to mask the anger in my voice. She hesitated for a moment too long before responding. "It's complicated. Sometimes work spills over. You know how it is." I didn't push further that night, though every fiber of my being wanted to. Instead, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every interaction we'd had over the past few months. Something was wrong, deeply wrong, and I needed answers. Over the next week, I became an investigator in my own marriage. I started observing her every move, noting her excuses, her sudden enthusiasm for business trips that were conveniently scheduled in tropical destinations. One night, I stayed awake after she had fallen asleep, quietly slipping out of bed to check her phone. But it was password protected now, a new development, and she had cleared her recent messages. My suspicions only grew. Then came the trip that solidified my fears. Sophie told me she was heading to a corporate retreat at a beachside resort. "It's mandatory," she said with a hint of frustration, as if daring me to question her. "The whole team will be there," but she left out one crucial detail. After a little digging, I discovered that the retreat wasn't for the entire team. Just Sophie, Chase, and their elderly CEO, who was infamous for being all business and no fun. I couldn't help but imagine the two of them, alone in paradise, indulging in secrets and stolen moments. The thought was a knife twisting in my chest. When Sophie returned from the trip, I was waiting for her in the kitchen. She breezed in, sun-kissed and radiant, her suitcase rolling behind her. "Hey," she said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. I turned away. "How was the retreat?" I asked, forcing my voice to remain steady. "Exhausting," she replied, her smile faltering. "I'm just glad to be home." But her phone buzzed on the counter, and when I glanced down, I saw the name again. Chase. I stood there, staring at her, as the weight of everything crashed down on me. The person I had built a life with, the mother of my children, was now a stranger. A stranger who had betrayed me in the worst way. Her tears and pleas echoed in the room, but I couldn't hear them clearly. My mind was racing, consumed by images of what I'd just seen. I turned and walked out without another word, ignoring her cries for me to stop. The drive home was a blur. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. When I pulled into the driveway, I sat there for a long time, trying to process what had just happened. My kids were asleep upstairs, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing in their family. I wanted to shield them from the pain, but I knew it was inevitable. Sophie's betrayal wasn't just between us. It would ripple through everything we had built together. The next morning, Sophie wasn't home. I didn't know if she had stayed at the hotel or gone somewhere else, and I didn't care. I focused on getting the kids ready for school, forcing myself to smile and pretend everything was fine. Once they were gone, I called my friend Alex again. "I need more than just evidence," I told him. "I need a plan." Over the next few days, Alex helped me gather every piece of proof I could find. Call logs, text messages, and even photos from Sophie's social media that hinted at her secret life with Chase. It was painful, combing through the details of her betrayal, but I knew it was necessary. I had to protect myself and my kids. When Sophie finally came home, she looked like a shadow of herself. Her makeup was smudged, her eyes red from crying. She stood in the doorway, clutching her purse, as if unsure whether she was still welcome. "James," she said quietly, her voice trembling. "Can we talk?" I crossed my arms, keeping my distance. "Talk about what? Sophie? The lies? The betrayal? Or maybe we should talk about how you threw away our family for him." She flinched, tears welling up again. "It wasn't like that. I didn't mean for this to happen." I laughed bitterly. "You didn't mean for it to happen? Do you think that makes it any better?" She stepped closer, reaching out to me, but I moved back. "James, please. I made a mistake. I know I hurt you, but we can fix this. We can go to counseling, work through it. I love you. I love our family." "Stop," I said, my voice firm. "Don't say you love me. You don't get to say that anymore." Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered the messages, the late nights, the hotel room. The anger burned away any trace of pity. "I've already spoken to a lawyer," I said, watching her expression shift from sadness to shock. "This marriage is over, Sophie." "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "It doesn't have to be. James, please think about the kids. Think about everything we've been through together." "I am thinking about the kids," I shot back. "They deserve better than this. They deserve parents who respect each other, who don't lie and cheat." Her shoulders slumped, and she sank into a chair, burying her face in her hands. "I didn't want this," she said, her voice muffled. "I didn't mean to hurt you." I didn't respond. What was there to say? Her regret couldn't undo the damage. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her to sit with her guilt. The days that followed were a whirlwind of legal meetings and emotional upheaval. Sophie tried to reach out to me several times, begging for another chance, but I refused to engage. I couldn't trust her, and without trust, there was no foundation left for our marriage. My priority was the kids, ensuring they felt as secure and loved as possible. Word of our separation spread quickly. Friends and family reached out, some offering support, others expressing shock. Sophie's best friend, Emily, called me one evening, her voice hesitant. "James, I don't know if this helps, but Sophie's been struggling for a while. She never said anything outright, but I think she felt disconnected. Maybe if you two talked." "Emily," I interrupted, my tone sharper than I intended. "I appreciate your concern, but this isn't something talking will fix. She made her choices, and now she has to live with them." Emily was silent for a moment before sighing. "I understand. I'm sorry it came to this. So was I." The divorce process was brutal, but I was determined to come out of it with as much stability as possible for the kids. My lawyer, a sharp and relentless woman named Clara, guided me through every step. "You're doing the right thing," she told me after one particularly draining meeting. "It might not feel like it now, but you're protecting yourself and your family." Meanwhile, Sophie's life seemed to unravel. Chase had cut ties with her almost immediately after our confrontation, and without him, she was left to face the fallout alone. She moved in with her parents temporarily, but the tension between them was palpable. When I dropped off the kids for visits, I could see the strain in her eyes, the weight of regret she carried. Part of me wanted to hate her, but another part, the part that had loved her for so many years, just felt sad. As the months passed, I focused on rebuilding. I threw myself into my work, my kids, and my hobbies, finding solace in the routines that had once seemed mundane. Friends encouraged me to start dating again, but I wasn't ready. The wounds were too fresh, the trust too shattered. Then one evening, while scrolling through an online forum for single parents, I stumbled across a post that resonated deeply. It was written by a man who had gone through a similar experience, and his words stuck with me. Healing isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about learning to live beyond it, to find joy in spite of the pain. I didn't know if I was ready to find joy again, but I knew one thing. I was ready to move forward. Moving forward wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Every day felt like a battle to reclaim pieces of myself that Sophie's betrayal had shattered. The house, once filled with shared laughter and memories, now echoed with a silence that was both comforting and haunting. I found myself lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying the events over and over in my head. The questions I had avoided asking Sophie swirled like a storm. Why him? Why now? Was it something I did? Was I not enough? One evening, as I was sorting through some old photos to create a scrapbook for the kids, I found a picture of us from a vacation years ago. Sophie's smile was wide, her eyes bright with happiness, and my arm was wrapped around her shoulders. We looked so young, so in love. My throat tightened as I studied the image. Where did that version of us go? I wanted to throw the photo away, to rid myself of any reminder of what we'd lost. But I couldn't. Not yet. Meanwhile, Sophie's attempts to reconcile grew more desperate. She would call, text, and even show up at the house unannounced. Each time, I kept my responses cold and distant, refusing to give her the hope she was looking for. One night, she stood on the porch, her face pale and tear-streaked, as she pleaded with me through the screen door. "James, please," she said, her voice breaking. "I've done everything you've asked. I've stayed away. I've given you space. But I can't lose you. I can't lose our family." Her words stung, but I didn't let it show. "You already lost it, Sophie. The moment you decided I wasn't enough." She flinched as if I'd slapped her, her hands trembling as she wiped her tears. "I made a mistake," she whispered. "A terrible, horrible mistake. But I love you, James. I love the life we built together. Can't we just try to fix this? For the kids." I shook my head, my resolve firm. "The kids will always have us, Sophie. But there is no us anymore. You broke that." She stood there for a moment longer, her shoulders sagging as the reality of my words sank in. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away, leaving me standing alone in the doorway. As time passed, the divorce proceedings inched closer to finalization. Clara, my lawyer, had been a relentless advocate, ensuring that Sophie's higher income was factored into the settlement. The arrangement gave me primary custody of the kids, with Sophie having visitation rights. She was also ordered to pay spousal support, a bitter pill for her to swallow, given her initial attempts to portray herself as the victim. When the final paperwork arrived, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. The chapter of my life with Sophie was officially closed, yet it was hard not to mourn the dreams we had once shared. I sat at the dining table, staring at the stack of documents, before finally signing my name at the bottom. The weeks that followed were a blur of adjustment. I focused on creating a sense of normalcy for the kids, making sure they felt safe and loved despite the upheaval. We established new routines, filling our days with bike rides, movie nights, and long talks about anything and everything. They were my anchor, the reason I pushed through even on the hardest days. But even with the kids as my priority, the loneliness was undeniable. Friends would invite me out, urging me to meet new people, but I wasn't ready. The idea of opening myself up to someone again felt impossible. How could I trust anyone after what Sophie had done? Then, one day, while grabbing coffee at a small cafe downtown, I met someone who would change everything. Her name was Claire, and she was sitting at a nearby table, sketching in a notebook. I noticed her because she kept glancing up at me, a small smile playing on her lips whenever our eyes met. Finally, as I was leaving, she stopped me. "Excuse me," she said, her voice warm and confident. "I don't usually do this, but you've been sitting here for an hour and haven't looked at your phone once. That's rare these days." I laughed, caught off guard. "I guess I'm old-fashioned." She tilted her head, studying me. "Or maybe you're just thoughtful. Either way, it's refreshing." Her words stayed with me as I walked to my car, and for the first time in months, I felt a spark of something I hadn't realized I was missing: hope. Claire and I started seeing each other casually, taking things slow. She was everything Sophie wasn't: genuine, grounded, and unafraid to speak her mind. She didn't play games or hide behind excuses, and she seemed to understand my hesitations without needing an explanation. As our relationship deepened, Sophie's life seemed to spiral further out of control. I heard through mutual friends that Chase had left her shortly after the affair came to light. Unable to cope with the fallout, she began drinking heavily and dating a string of men she barely knew. Her once polished exterior now seemed frayed, and when I saw her during drop-offs, it was clear the guilt and regret had taken a toll. One evening, after picking up the kids, Sophie pulled me aside. Her eyes were hollow, her voice unsteady. "James," she said, her tone softer than I'd ever heard it, "I just want to say, I'm sorry for everything." I nodded, unsure how to respond. Part of me wanted to forgive her, to let go of the anger that still simmered beneath the surface. But another part, the part that remembered every lie, every betrayal, wasn't ready. "I hope you find peace, Sophie," I said finally. "For the kids' sake." She nodded, tears streaming down her face, and I walked away, feeling lighter somehow. It wasn't closure, not entirely, but it was a step forward. With Claire by my side, the kids thriving, and Sophie's presence fading into the background, I began to rebuild my life. It wasn't perfect, and the scars of the past would always be there, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was moving towards something better. Months turned into a year, and life began to settle into a new rhythm. The kids adjusted to the changes better than I could have hoped, their laughter filling the house again. I threw myself into being the best father I could be, finding joy in the small moments. Making pancakes on Saturday mornings, cheering them on at their soccer games, and helping them with school projects late into the night. Claire became a steady presence in our lives, though I was careful about introducing her to the kids. When the time finally felt right, she met them at a park on a sunny afternoon. To my relief, they warmed to her instantly. Claire had a way of making people feel seen and valued, and it was clear the kids felt it too. Watching her play tag with them, her laughter ringing out as she dodged and darted, I realized just how much my life had changed, and how much better it had become. Meanwhile, Sophie's life continued its downward spiral. The once confident, driven woman I had married was now a shadow of herself. She was still working at Apex Consulting, but the stress of her job and the financial strain of supporting 2 households were taking a visible toll. Whenever I saw her, she looked exhausted, her eyes hollow and her movements sluggish. Mutual friends told me she was struggling to find her footing, bouncing between meaningless flings and nights of drinking alone. It wasn't long before Sophie's behavior started affecting her time with the kids. She missed a few pickups, and when she did show up, her disheveled appearance and slurred words made it clear she wasn't in a good place. I hated seeing her like that. Not for myself, but for the kids. They deserved better. One night, after Sophie failed to show up for a scheduled visit, I made the difficult decision to file for full custody. It wasn't about punishing her. It was about protecting our children. My lawyer, Clara, handled the case with her usual efficiency, and when the court ruled in my favor, I felt a mix of relief and sorrow. Sophie's visitation rights were reduced to supervised visits, and though she protested at first, it was clear even to her that it was the best option. The day after the ruling, Sophie called me. Her voice was broken, heavy with emotion. "James," she said, barely above a whisper, "I know I've failed. I've let everyone down, especially the kids. I don't know how to fix it." I didn't have an answer for her. All I could say was, "Get help, Sophie. For yourself. For them." The call ended, and I sat there, staring at the phone, wondering if she ever would. Life moved forward, and the distance between Sophie and me grew wider. Claire and I became a true team, building a home filled with love and laughter. She encouraged me to pursue new passions, and I found myself rediscovering hobbies I had long abandoned. I even started teaching a self-defense class at a local community center, sharing my expertise with people eager to learn. One evening, as Claire and I sat on the porch watching the kids play in the yard, she turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "You know," she said, her voice soft, "you're one of the strongest people I've ever met." I laughed, shaking my head. "I don't feel strong most days." She reached over, placing a hand on mine. "Strength isn't about never falling. It's about getting back up, even when it feels impossible. You've done that, James, and it's incredible." Her words stayed with me long after the sun had set. She was right. I had been through hell and back, but I had survived. More than that, I had rebuilt a life worth living, not just for myself, but for the people I loved. As the years passed, I watched my kids grow into kind, resilient individuals. Sophie's visits became less frequent, though she seemed to be making progress in her recovery. We were civil when we crossed paths, though the wounds of the past ensured we would never be more than co-parents. Claire and I eventually got married in a small, intimate ceremony, surrounded by family and close friends. As I stood at the altar, looking into her eyes, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. This wasn't the life I had planned, but it was the life I had fought for, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. The scars of betrayal would always be there, a reminder of what I had endured, but they no longer defined me. I was more than Sophie's husband, more than the man she had hurt. I was a father, a partner, and a survivor, and for the first time in a long time I felt whole.